I'll eat it. I'll take it. Please give it to me. I want it. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we are going to be doing my November wrap up. All right, before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments, what was the most forgettable book you read this month? The one that, you read it, but it's definitely not gonna stick with you. You're already having a hard time remembering the characters. Let's talk about it. Alrighty, so hello. First off, can you believe it's December? I'm still in awe about that. It's so ridiculous. Time moves so fast. I had a very productive nonfiction November month, although it seemed like I really didn't read a lot. When I look at my numbers, I'm shocked at how high these are because I felt like I had the worst reading month. It was going so slowly, and yet apparently I actually did pretty well. So jumping right on in, first off, let's talk about my stats. In November, I read 12 books, and across those, I read 2,207 pages. That number feels wrong. This graphic might have a different number. The number on the screen will include converting audiobook hours to pages, but in regard to audiobook hours, I listened to about 40 hours, which is a fair amount. My average rating came out to 4.25 stars. Fantastic, absolutely love that. And unfortunately, I did have one DNF. The little goals that I keep for myself, did I read a book that was over 450 pages? Yes, I did. Did I read a nonfiction book? I read many. Did I read a comic or manga? Yes, I did. You can see 2 out of 3 of those on my genre breakdown. First off, I read 2 fantasy books, 1 horror book, 1 manga, 6 nonfiction, and then 2 romance. As for the stats I keep for myself, turns out apparently I sort of started a series. We'll talk about that in specifics later. I continued 1 other series and then I finished out 2. Just a reminder, I'm only talking about the books in this video that I did not talk about in vlogs which came out, namely my nonfiction November vlog came out recently, so I'll put a link to that in the cards if you're interested in thoughts on all of those books. But I do have 2 other nonfiction books that I will be talking to y'all about. I'm gonna be a little boring today and just go through the books in the order that I read them. So starting at the top, I did a reread of Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson because this was our group pick for the Fall into Winter readathon book in October. Initially, I wasn't actually planning to reread this, but Josh actually ended up buying me a copy for my birthday, and I figured, what the hey, why not? It reads pretty quickly, plus I wanted the opportunity to annotate it, which I did, and had a very fun time. So this is a retelling of Dracula through the eyes of his brides, and talks about the many events they have lived through together, the relationship they have had, and how it has expanded to include some of the other wives. I read this the first time for my Goodreads Horror 5x5 last year, so I'll put a link to that in the cards. I enjoyed this just as much the second time around, probably more actually, because I really enjoyed annotating this. Gibson's work here is just so well done. They're writing around relationships, both good and bad. It's so well layered and nuanced, but also the characters themselves, in particular Constanta, the main character. I absolutely love watching the development of her, seeing the rage that burns within her, and the few times you actually really get to see it showcased on page are just delicious. This is a very heavy read, so if you do need content warnings, please check those out, but I highly recommend this. I know it's made its rounds on booktube, so if you somehow haven't read it, please check it out because it's fantastic. It's not quite a romance. It is sort of a horror, but I guess really it kind of floats between fantasy horror with romantic elements. Honestly, just the writing in it is so good, and that's what I had the best time with. Gibson's work is phenomenal. I loved this again, glowing 5 stars. On top of Dowry, I also read An Encore of Roses, which is a bit of like a little short story Gibson wrote focusing on the 3 wives after the events of this book. And that one I would label as a romance. It is through the eyes of one of the other wife characters, and I really liked that. It was a spicy but emotional time. Probably read anything Gibson puts out about those 3 if they ever write more, because I'll eat it. I'll take it. Please give it to me. I want it. When I went to mark that short story as read on Goodreads is when I noticed that apparently this is kind of a series now, as Gibson is coming out with another book, I suppose set in the same world, which is also a vampiric retelling, but that one is going to be focusing on Carmilla, and that actually comes out in February. Cannot wait for that. So technically I sort of both started and continued a series here. I don't know if they're really gonna go off each other. I'm very intrigued to see what Gibson does there. For the next series that I finished, I read Iris Kelly Doesn't Date by Ashley Herring Blake, which is the third book in the Bright Fall series, following the last of this little friend group. I was really looking forward to this one because Iris is my favorite character of the friend group. She's loud, she's brash, she's unapologetically herself, and I just adore her for how she is written. Unfortunately though, this did have my least favorite trope, which was fake dating. Iris, who is currently in a bit of a writing slump and is told, well, why don't you try getting outside of your comfort zone and doing something else artistic, see if perhaps that sparks some influence for her. So she ends up going to try out for a play that is putting on a queer retelling of All's Well That Ends Well by Shakespeare, which honestly sounds like a fantastic time. I would love to see that. However, while there, she ends up running into Stevie, who she had a disastrous sort of one-night stand with, but unfortunately, Iris isn't aware that Stevie told her friends she and Iris are now dating. So Stevie then begs Iris to play along with this, and Iris agrees under the guise of going on these fake dates to give her some inspiration for the romance book she's been writing. But of course, you know, fake dating leads to real feelings. There's a little bit of friendship drama going on in here, and then also just Iris trying to be accepted for the woman she is by her family, by her friends, and not being so insecure about finding love, dealing with the trauma of her previous relationships. While on the opposite side, Stevie has really high anxiety and feels like so oftentimes her friends are putting her in a box and treating her with kid gloves, and she's really trying to push against that and live her own life, figure out what it is she wants to do next. And if it's not already clear to you with all the rambling I just did about the summary alone, I loved this. This shockingly was actually my favorite of the series. Like I said, fake dating, usually not a trope I enjoy, so I was very nervous going into this. But I actually ended up adoring everything about it. Iris and Stevie both hopped off the page as characters, which I wasn't particularly surprised about because in the previous books in the series, Herring Blake's work has been the same, but every single interaction between these two just felt so smooth and real, very genuine, very authentic. I absolutely adored how both of these characters grew throughout the book, both romantically and in their personal lives, as individuals and together, and how the healing we saw them do really allowed them to work as a healthy couple in the end. Was I irritated by the third act breakup? Because of course it's a romance book, so those are basically necessary. Yes. Well, slightly. But at the same time, it actually felt like it was needed so that both of them could reflect on what was happening and then try to grow from that. Unsurprisingly, characters working on their own shit as individuals before coming back together to ensure that their relationship is stronger and better than ever. Adore it. Love it every single time. The awkward moments due to fake dating actually didn't feel fake or uncomfortable. They seemed pretty realistic. They made sense for these two women who really didn't know each other that well. Oh, also the spice. The ending of this one was super freaking sweet, and I think it was a very solid ending to round out the series as well. Literally, the only complaint I had about this book was Iris sort of had this tension with her mom that unfortunately never felt like it was really resolved on page. I really just wanted Iris to snap at her mom and put her in her place. But at the same time, that aspect of the story wasn't super prevalent, so I can't really fault it too much for that. This was my favorite of the series. It came out to 4.5 stars. The previous books in this series I really enjoyed, but wouldn't quite label them as favorites. This one I could see myself doing. This one I actually kind of want to buy and have on my shelves. Unfortunately, I can't really say the same for this next book. I did continue on with the series by reading Bookshops and Bonedust, which is the prequel to Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I got the audio of this from my library, and I'm glad I did because in the end, my feelings for it were pretty much on par with my feelings for Legends and Lattes. It was a cute, cozy fantasy. It was exactly what it told me it was on the 10, but I just didn't really love it. This one, as I said, is a prequel, so we are seeing Viv still in her raiding days. However, she has been injured and ends up staying in this small town, befriending the owner of a bookstore, and sort of starts to help her clean up the store, try and bring in more business, but along the way is also investigating what's happening with this necromancer that her raiding party was chasing after, I guess. Fighting. We didn't actually see a lot of fighting on it. Anyway, yeah, you get what I'm saying. I think Travis Baldree can definitely hit that cozy feel. Very great, super atmospheric. It was cute, easy, lighthearted, but at no point was I ever really sucked into the book. I didn't have a hard time putting it down. While Legends and Lattes sort of more focused on the wonderful aspects of coffee and coffee shops, this one focused more on books, bookstores, and there was also a fair amount of food. All those things I really liked, I definitely agreed with, but that doesn't come together to make a book that I love. I did think the necromancer plot was interesting. It added a little bit higher stakes than Legends and Lattes had, but it felt like it took forever to really develop. Also, there's a sapphic romance in this one, which feels pretty unnecessary because it's a prequel to Legends and Lattes, which has its own sapphic romance. At no point could I really get invested in the romance here because I knew clearly it wasn't going to go anywhere serious. This is the second book with Viv, and I still could take her or leave her. She was fine. I did enjoy Fern, the owner of the bookstore, a bit more. She had more personality, a little bit more spunk. The one other big positive I can talk about is the fact that there is a final chapter, which is actually more of like an epilogue for Legends and Lattes, but ties this book into it. And I liked that. I thought that was cute and clever on Baldree's part. This was just fine. My Cawpile breakdown for it came out to 3.5 stars. For people who really loved Legends and Lattes, I could see them enjoying this. Like I said, this was pretty on par with my feelings for the previous book. Cute, not outstanding. Finishing out the series that I worked on this month, I read Spyfamily Volume 7 by Tatsuya Endo. This continues the Spyfamily trend. I'm sure I don't have to give you a summary because this manga has been everywhere lately, but a quick synopsis as we are following the spy Twilight who ends up having to create a fake family to get closer to his target. He enlists the help of a little girl, Anya, who turns out to be a telepath, though he is unaware, as well as a woman to be his wife, except Yor is an assassin. She does not know he is a spy. He does not know she is an assassin. It is a lot of fun. Honestly, this one is mostly filler bits. The first mission, chapters are broken down as missions. The first mission is closing out the things that happened in the prior volume, which that one kind of does focus on the main plot. There's a ton of little filler stories that sort of expand on certain characters, but not a ton. And then there's a final one that is going to kick off the next main bit of the plot in the following volume, I imagine. I enjoyed this. It's very cute, very fun, but like it didn't really develop a ton of the actual story. So my rating for this one came out to 4 stars. I still love the characters. I love the family. I cannot wait to continue. Finally, getting to some nonfiction books that I read this month. First off, I had The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which fulfilled my digital TBR jar prompt for my weekly reading vlog. Put a link to that in the cards. So The Five is a book that I had heard a lot of people talking about when I first got onto booktube and was really intrigued because it is focusing on the 5 victims of Jack the Ripper and expanding on their lives outside of their connection to this murderer. I really liked the idea of this book, but the execution of it didn't quite give me what I was wanting, and I think that's mostly just an error on my part in what my expectations were versus what Rubenhold actually gave me. It did what the subtitle set out to do, expanding on these women's lives and putting more focus on them as individuals rather than as victims to Jack the Ripper. However, I was expecting a bit more of a true crime feel to the story, a bit more commentary around their lives, around how they came to be victims and the way the media portrayed them, but there wasn't as much of that as I really wanted. Clearly, from reading this, Rubenhold spent a ton of time going into research about as much as she could for each of these women. Their backgrounds, their struggles, their situations that led to them being desirable victims for Jack the Ripper. However, like I mentioned, there isn't a lot of narrative going on in this story. A lot of the book feels like it is just relaying of facts. I learned more about the everyday life of women at this point in time in London and other parts of Europe. That's interesting, but again, not what I was initially expecting. Another issue I had with the writing style here was the long introductions to many different players within these women's lives that often didn't really feel necessary because they weren't that integral to what Rubenhold was really telling. Those parts started to just feel like filler to sort of pad the story a bit, make it a little bit longer. And those in particular would be what would lose my attention. Along with that, because so much of this book is just focused on relaying facts, unfortunately, by the time you're reaching the fourth or fifth victim, a lot of their lives and stories start to blur together because they're so similar. And that also made my intrigue drop, unfortunately. I applaud the author for what she was trying to do with this book, but unfortunately for me, it didn't make for the most interesting reading experience. So my rating for it came out to 3.5 stars. I think you just have to have managed expectations for this book and also different expectations from what I thought I was getting. I also read Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. This was the physical book for my TBR jar for the month. I believe it was anticipated. I think the blurb on the back kind of sells this book a little bit easier than I would in saying that Jenny Lawson is exploring her lifelong battle with mental illness, a hysterical, ridiculous book about crippling depression and anxiety. And that's definitely what it is. Lawson's writing style is so back and forth all over the place, but like it works so perfectly for me. Her humor is very ridiculous, very chaotic. If you pick this up and you don't immediately click with it, you're probably not going to enjoy it. However, I had a fantastic time with this. This is my second of Jenny Lawson's work. I absolutely, again, think you have to enjoy her humor style. It's pretty similar to my own, and I don't mind the bouncing around writing, so I had a phenomenal time. When it comes to the writing, I'm talking like stream of consciousness to the most extreme. Lawson is absolutely hilarious, but this book is so personal and raw, desperate and uncomfortable. Jenny really lays herself bare and multiple times throughout the story. I was incredibly impressed, moved. I felt really connected to her. I had such a good time with this. I was cracking up laughing so often. I actually listened to probably 2/3 of this in a single day via audio because Jenny actually reads the book herself. Her relationship with her husband sounds so interesting and so hilarious. If all my spewing and smiling hasn't told you, this was a glowing 5 stars. Finally, the last book I read was The September House by Carissa Orlando. I initially got this in October and I started into it, but unfortunately I waited too long and I had to return it to my library. So I had only gotten about 60 pages in, but I put myself on the wait list and it finally came back to me. So this book is following a woman who lives in this house where she and her husband bought it, and it was her dream house. It was the perfect house she's wanted for all of her life, and they finally settled down together. But unfortunately, the house is a little haunted. Come September, things get really bad. While our main character is determined to stay here after the 3rd September, her husband ends up leaving. And when she finally can't put off telling her daughter anymore, shockingly, her daughter is furious and comes to investigate to find out what actually happened to her dad. Which is very unfortunate for Margaret though, because she is determined that nothing terrifying, nothing creepy, nothing weird in this house will touch her daughter. That summary right there kind of felt like a horror comedy because Margaret is so determined to keep her daughter, Catherine, from finding out that this house is haunted. It is the perfect house as far as she's concerned. These are just little inconveniences that you have to deal with. At the same time though, through flashbacks, we see more of Margaret's relationship with her husband, as well as how they came to own the house and what has really transpired in the house, the history of the house. And then of course, there's the mystery around what actually happened to her husband. Unfortunately, I think the slow pacing and the character focus in this actually didn't work great for me, which is very shocking to say because usually that perfectly describes books I enjoy. But here, I just was never super sold on Margaret as a main character. I wanted more creepy things from the house dispersed throughout. This dragged a lot for my taste and it felt very repetitive at times. There would occasionally be a horrific scene or a very creepy atmosphere moment that would reinvigorate me and keep me going. I wanted more of those. I think if this book was actually a bit shorter, it might have worked better for me. Eventually, I kind of started to put together that this was hitting similar vibes as The Shining, which I know is a classic. I know everybody loves The Shining, but I just didn't get it when I watched it. There was such a long buildup, and in my opinion, I just didn't feel like the reward at the end was really worth it. As the climax is gearing up, there's actually this great part with the writing where you start to question whether Margaret actually is seeing what she thinks she's seeing. Is she a reliable narrator or not? And I loved that aspect. I actually wish that was lengthened. The ending itself was very shiver-inducing, and there were some really horrific metaphors and imagery that was utilized that was so perfect. I loved those also. That's kind of my problem with this, is there were certain things I really liked about the horror in this book, but I wanted more of that. In the end, this came out to like roughly 3.5 stars. Again, I liked some of the horror in it, but the writing style wasn't perfect for me here. Something in the future from Carissa Orlando will work very well for me, hopefully, because there were many things in this should have been really up my alley, but this one just didn't quite give me what I was wanting, unfortunately. Alrighty, and that's a sad note to end on, but that's it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!